Doug signed a prenuptial agreement, one that by its terms would keep him out of any leadership role at Daystar. Joni Lamb was reportedly caught on recording stating that Doug Weiss had no interest in being involved with the network. She made these comments to reassure Jonathan and Susie, framing Doug as a non-threat, someone who was simply there to support his wife, with a prenup in place to safeguard Daystar from any takeover. But since Joni's passing, a very different picture has emerged. Doug and Rachel are now openly clashing on set over who controls the network. In Joni's final days, Doug was granted authority over her medical decisions. His name appears on the property deed of her former home, and today he sits on the executive leadership team at Daystar. So, the question on everyone's mind is, did that prenup ever actually exist? Was Joni misleading Jonathan just to get him to stand down? And if so, was she the one who ultimately got played by Doug and Lisa Weiss? Here's what makes this even more complicated. Doug and Lisa continue to work together at heart-to-heart counseling, through the divorce, through Doug's marriage to Joni, and even now after Joni's death, which raises a darker question. Was this entire relationship a calculated business move, a coordinated strategy between Doug and Lisa to gain control of Daystar? And has Lisa stayed quiet all this time because she was in on it from the beginning? Today, we're breaking it all down. Joni's recorded statements about Doug, the prenup mystery, the Doug and Rachel power struggle, and whether Joni was a pawn in the Weiss family's larger plan. Let's get into it. First, let me play you exactly what was said, and don't forget to subscribe and become part of our family.
He's been nothing but a blessing to me, an incredible husband the month that I've been married to him. He doesn't want to take over Daystar. I think really the fear here is not that he would interfere in Daystar. I think the fear is that somehow they think they're losing something by him coming. But that's a lie from the enemy. It's just not true.
These are Joni Lamb's own words about Doug Weiss and the prenuptial agreement. The remarks came from a recorded conversation in which Joni was actively trying to convince Jonathan and Susie that Doug posed no threat to the network. Joni said it herself, he has no desire to take over Daystar. And yet, look at what actually unfolded. While Joni was ill, Doug was hosting ministry programming on his own. He was going head-to-head with Rachel on set in a battle for control. And today, he's positioned as a key figure in Daystar's future leadership. That leaves us with only two possibilities. Either Joni wasn't being truthful with Jonathan, or Doug wasn't being truthful with Joni. One of them wasn't telling the whole story. And here's exactly what Joni had to say about the prenup.
Doug signed a prenup. He knows he'll never have a position of leadership here.
According to Joni, Doug signed a prenup. She stated plainly that he would never hold any leadership position at Daystar, and yet his name is now on property deeds. He was hosting shows on the network. He was making critical decisions about Joni's health care in her final days. So was there ever really a prenup, or was that simply a story Joni told to get Jonathan to stand down and stop pushing back? Now, let's look at the tactics Joni used to manage Jonathan in that conversation, because what she said next is very telling. Take a listen.
You have been the most loyal and faithful son. You don't have nothing to fear from me, but I am putting my foot down on this. And you either come along with me or you leave. And I don't want you to leave.
In the same breath that Joni told Jonathan he had been her most loyal son, she handed him an ultimatum: get on board with Doug or get out. That's not a conversation. That's a power move. That's control dressed up as family. Jonathan was left with two options: set aside his own discernment and accept Doug, or walk away from the ministry he'd given his life to. When Jonathan chose to stand on principle, Joni didn't just disagree with him, she fired him and cut him off entirely. So when she said she didn't want him to leave, those words meant nothing. The moment he refused to fall in line, she showed him the door. Now listen to what Joni had to say about Jonathan's concerns.
You're wrong about Doug, and it will prove out. It's already starting to prove out. It will prove out, and one day you will say, Mom, I was wrong. I have no doubt about that.
Joni was absolutely convinced that Jonathan had it wrong. She told him point blank, one day you'll come back to me and admit it. But look at where things stand just 3 years later. Joni is gone. Doug's name is attached to property valued in the millions. He was locked in a power struggle with Rachel over the network, and Jonathan never even got the chance to say a proper goodbye to his mother. The very thing Susie warned about has swallowed Daystar whole. So who was actually wrong? Jonathan, who raised the alarm, or Joni, who silenced him for it? The more you look at it, the harder it is to escape the conclusion that Joni was deceived. She was played, and every warning that could have protected her was dismissed or shut down before it could land. And now we come to the most jaw-dropping part of Joni's statement. Listen to what she said about Jonathan.
It's on everything I own. He's the only child that's on every account. He could steal all my money right now if he wanted to. That's how much I trust him.
Let that sink in for a moment. Joni claimed that Jonathan was tied to everything she owned, every account, every asset. She even suggested he had the access to drain her finances completely. And then she married Doug. Within 3 years, Doug's name is on the deed to a Florida beach condo. Doug was involved in the lake house transaction. Doug was handed authority over Joni's medical decisions. Properties were quietly moved into a trust bearing his name. So what exactly happened between then and now? Did Joni remove Jonathan from those accounts and replace him with Doug? Because if Jonathan was on everything before Doug entered the picture, and Doug now holds property rights across the board, the math points in one direction. Joni systematically swapped one out for the other. And that is precisely what this kind of influence does. It isolates. It pushes out the people who genuinely belong. It replaces the rightful heir with someone who positioned themselves to inherit it all. Coming up, let's look directly at the contradiction between what Joni said and what the records actually show.
Doug signed a prenup. He knows he'll never have a position of leadership here.
But here's what reality actually looks like. Doug was co-hosting Ministry Now. That's a leadership role. Doug was making calls on Joni's healthcare. That's control. Doug's name is on property deeds. That's a financial stake. Doug was going to war with Rachel over the network. That's someone who believes he has a legitimate claim. And Doug's name is on the revocable trust. That's someone positioned to inherit. So when you lay it all out, there are really only 3 ways to read this situation. Option 1, Joni lied to Jonathan about the prenup from the start just to get him to back off. Option 2, a prenup did exist, but Joni gradually dismantled it herself, handing Doug property, adding him to accounts, making him executor over time. Option 3, Doug lied to Joni about what he actually wanted, and she genuinely had no idea he had his eye on leadership. My read? Option 3. Joni was played. Doug told her exactly what she needed to hear, and she believed it because she was lonely, she was vulnerable, and she was desperate for support after losing Marcus. He walked into that window and made himself indispensable. Now, here's where the story takes another turn entirely. Joni Lamb, in her own words, acknowledged that Doug and Lisa Weiss still work together at heart-to-heart counseling. Sit with that for a second. Doug divorced Lisa, publicly claiming she had been abusive and had withheld intimacy for decades. Those were serious, damaging allegations, and yet every single day, the two of them continued running the counseling center they built together side by side, and Joni knew this. So the question becomes, was Joni completely fooled, or was she simply not choosing to look too closely? Did she genuinely believe Doug had no interest in Daystar, or did she know something was off and convince herself it didn't matter? Because here's the thing, if Joni was fully aware that Doug and Lisa never stopped being business partners, then she had every reason to question whether that divorce was ever real. This wasn't a broken marriage. This looked like a business arrangement, one with a very clear strategy behind it. Doug and Lisa remained partners. Doug married Joni and gained access to Daystar. Heart-to-heart counseling gained enormous exposure through the platform, and when Joni passed, both Doug and Lisa stood to benefit from everything that had been quietly put in place. Was Joni played? Everything points to yes. Now let me walk you through what happened in the immediate aftermath of Joni's death. According to sources, Doug Weiss and Rachel Lamb Brown got into a heated confrontation on the Daystar set on the very day Joni died.
We have Rachel, who wants to be the leader of Daystar. We have the heir apparent, who was unceremoniously, unbiblically, and I believe quite possibly illegally, things that were done to Jonathan were not right. Unfortunately, Joni is gone, and so now there's going to be a shaking of who gets the power. And it's already begun. on the day that Joni died, Rachel and Doug had, allegedly, and this is by sources that I cannot reveal, but in front of multiple witnesses, Rachel and Doug had an out. And I guess I want to say something. You go, Rachel. I didn't think I might find myself siding up with Rachel on something. But if there's one gal that's going to deal face to face, head up with Doug, it's probably Rachel. So apparently something set them off. I don't know the details of like what became the problem, but there was an out loud upset between Rachel and Doug.
On the very day Joni took her last breath, Doug and Rachel were already at each other's throats. And the reason is simple. They're both reaching for the same thing, control of Daystar. Rachel and Rebecca want Doug gone, out of the house, out of the network, out of the picture entirely. But Doug isn't walking away quietly. He believes he has something to fight for. So let's ask the question that's been building this entire time. Was Joni Lamb played by Doug and Lisa Weiss? Because when you line up the evidence, the picture gets hard to ignore. Doug and Lisa never truly went their separate ways, despite a divorce that Doug himself described in devastating terms. Abuse, decades of withheld intimacy. The two of them continued showing up to the same workplace every single day. That's not what a real separation looks like. That suggests the divorce existed on paper and nowhere else. Then consider what happened once Doug married Joni. Heart-to-heart counseling became a Daystar original program almost immediately. That kind of platform exposure is worth millions in advertising alone. And who walked away with that benefit? Both Doug and Lisa. Now look at Lisa's behavior throughout all of this. Not a single public statement, no interviews, no response to the divorce allegations, no reaction to Doug remarrying, no comment on Joni's death. Complete and total silence. Why? Because she never needed to say anything. Lisa understood exactly what was happening. This was a business move, and she was a willing partner in it. She kept her head down, kept working alongside Doug, and waited. And then Joni was gone. Doug married her in June 2023. She was dead by May 2026. 3 years. That's all it took. And in those 3 years, Doug gained access to Daystar. Heart to Heart gained a massive national platform. Doug was added to property deeds, and Doug was handed authority over Joni's most critical health decisions. Was any of this accidental? Or did Doug and Lisa identify a grieving, vulnerable woman and recognize exactly what was possible? Let's talk about why people are now demanding an autopsy, because there are several threads here that simply don't tie together cleanly. First, the timeline raises eyebrows. Joni appeared healthy at her wedding in June 2023 and was dead within 3 years. Second, Doug had complete control of her care. He determined who could visit her and when. He was the one making decisions in her final weeks. He was the last line of access to Joni Lamb. Third, the medical story doesn't fully hold up. Daystar pointed to back fractures as the explanation, but medical professionals looking at the reported symptoms, facial swelling, paralysis in the arm, a drooping eye, say those point far more towards stroke, cancer, or neurological disease. The official narrative and the physical symptoms are not telling the same story. Fourth, the people who stood to gain are not hard to identify. Doug gets influence over or outright control of Daystar. Heart to Heart keeps its platform. Lisa keeps her business partner and the exposure that comes with him. And Jonathan, the son, the one who saw it coming, remains on the outside looking in. When the beneficiaries are that clear and the circumstances are that murky, people are going to ask questions. That's exactly why so many are calling for an autopsy, because something in this story doesn't add up. So let's bring this home. Joni Lamb sat across from Jonathan and Susie and told them Doug had no interest in Daystar. She told them a prenup was in place to protect the network and the children. She told them Doug was just there to support her. And now,
Doug was given control over her health and her property. Doug and Lisa are still side by side, still benefiting from the Daystar platform they never could have accessed without Joni. Doug is in an open power struggle for the network, and Jonathan, the one who saw it coming, is still locked out of the family he gave everything to build. Either Joni lied to Jonathan to silence him, or Doug lied to Joni and she never saw it coming. Based on everything we've walked through today, I believe Joni was deceived. She was a woman in grief, in a vulnerable place, and someone recognized that and took full advantage. Joni died after only 3 years. Doug is fighting for control. Lisa is still working with Doug, and by nearly every measure, the Weiss family came out ahead. That's why people aren't letting this go. That's why the autopsy demands are getting louder. Because when the pieces land the way these pieces have landed, silence isn't enough of an answer. If this opened your eyes, share it with someone who needs to see the full picture. And remember, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Be part of our family.